All right, everyone. I'm here with Christiaan Mader. We are here to talk about Big Towns, which is a conference that just completed its second year. And it was sort of inspired by the radically rural model. And so I thought it would be really cool to do a little story capture and find out more about how that happened. And what you
Mhm.
won't see is the 30-minute conversation we had all about kind of the logistics that go into planning a summit. And we talked about, anyone who does event planning knows there's all the conversations about sponsorship and relationships with folks who are helping plan the content and how do you structure your meetings and all that sort of stuff. So we just had a really good conversation, just kind of comparing some notes about that. And now I just want to kind of capture the story. So, Christiaan, I would love for you to just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what your organization is now, what you do now, and what was your trajectory getting there. Um,
Sure.
and what's the thread that's carried you through everything you've done?
I'll say right up front, I think you could go further than saying sort of inspired. I mean, we almost unashamedly stole the radically rural model and applied it just to a different geography and scale. So I am a journalist by trade. I started a nonprofit news outlet here in Lafayette, Louisiana called The Current in 2018. And that's sort of the connection point that brought me to radically rural. So I've been a publisher. We operate a donor-based model essentially, and somehow, some way, the folks at Radically Rural found out about the work we were doing and thought that it would be relevant to the journalism track at the summit. And so I was invited to come speak basically about what they call, reader revenue models, which is a fancy way of saying asking people for money to support your journalism, right? And so I came and spoke at Radically Rural and fell in love with the concepts, fell in love with Keene, which is a really lovely town. I walked away from it thinking that I'd been to so many industry conferences, for instance, or even as a journalist, been covered events of various types, right, where you're bringing in thinkers, and I had thought leaders um, around a central topic, and they come and they sit, and the thing that they talk about is how they're going to get out of their silos, and yet they're doing this talk about getting out of silos from within a silo. And so the thing that seemed really ingenious about the radically rural concept was that I'm up there as a member of the press, and I'm connecting with my colleagues in the press, and we're talking about the issues that face media in small towns and in big towns alike. But I could move into a discussion about a resident-owned community, or I could look at workforce challenges and emergency services in rural communities, right? And as a journalist, it's obviously very interesting to me because I'm always looking for um, ideas to encounter and to interrogate and to think about. But also just as like a private citizen, right? Like thinking about well, obviously all of these things come with um, a lot of tendrils and they need to connect. And so if you don't create actual space for them to connect, then the getting out of the silo never happens. So that's kind of what I walked away. Like what did my big picture radically rural experience was how great is the idea of a radically rural, and how could I create something like that for the city that I'm from, which is not a rural place. Lafayette's also not a big place. So we kind of landed on this idea, well, what is Lafayette in the American landscape? Well, it's a mid-sized city, which, it's a big town, a place too big
Like
to
the middle
be a
child.
small. That's right. And that there's a specific experience associated with that, and that other cities would connect with it. And so we started Big Towns, which is a summit modeled almost identically on the sort of radically rural framework, right, of multi disciplinary tracks, trying to do outreach to communities across the country and bring them to our community to talk and sort of create actual space for them to have conversation. And that's Big Towns in a nutshell, which if you're following this, right, and you're familiar with radical rural, should sound very familiar, I guess is the point.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
so when you had that thought, so you had this experience at the summit, and what was interesting to you was kind of the recognition of the interdependence of all of our work, and you were inspired by it. So then what were the nuts and bolts of saying I have this idea to getting it done? You were
Um,
because I remember you wanted to meet with me and Terry from
mhm.
the Sentinel, our local newspaper. who like co-planned the summit with us.
Mhm.
And I just remember like throwing everything I had at you, like, take this template, take this spreadsheet, like, take this,
Mhm.
like, what was it? Was that like the first planning call that you had? And how did that kick it off for you?
It's been long enough that I don't remember how far into the process we were when we kind of came back, but I think it's fair to say that we essentially applied like a Mad Lib there, right? What made a lot of sense to me, of course, just apart from the the values of radically rural and like the way that it's structured programmatically, but actually the structure of the partnerships involved, right? You had a news
Mhm.
organization, right? And Hannah Grimes, which, we have counterparts to those kinds of organizations here in Lafayette. And I thought,
Mhm.
okay, well, if those two organizations can make this work together, then I'm the sentinel in the equation. I need to find a Hannah Grimes in this situation. So
Yeah.
that's basically what I did. I mean, so I talked to one of my board members who sits on a foundation. She's a director of a family foundation here, and sort of posed that question to her, and we started going in search of the Hannah Grimes type partner. Like, who's the it was to some extent like a natural fit, like looking for an agency that works in entrepreneurship or economic development. Um, but where we actually landed though was with our area United Way,
Oh,
who at
cool. Yeah.
and part of the reason for that was they were really interested in that first year building out a full track on health. United Way had done a lot of work locally in social determinants of health, and they felt like they had a lot of stakeholders that would be interested in that. And so um, it became a natural partnership, and they remain our key partners. So the big towns sort of pair. If there's Hannah Grimes and then Keene Sentinel in Keene, here it's the current our news organization and United Way of Acadiana, which is the regional United Way.
That's super cool. So what are the tracks that you have?
So we have four right now.
Mhm.
We do, and they're kind of interdependent in their own way, right? So there's growth and economy, which is sort of your economy track,
Mhm.
health and healthcare, because we wanted it to make sure that it captured the idea that we're not just talking about delivery of health services, right? There's
Yeah.
this social determinants quality, which as a newsroom we had been covering quite extensively.
Hmm.
Civics and media, which right now mostly looks at journalism, but the idea is that it can talk about civic engagement more broadly. We did an interesting panel this year, for instance, on civic information systems, which definitely got
Cool.
outside of journalism as it's conventionally
Hmm.
understood, and then community and culture. So like the space for arts and sort of building social fabric through expression, et cetera.
That's
Um,
super cool.
so we've done that as four tracks. I don't. We've had discussions internally so far about like, well, do we need to start subdividing them? Right. For instance, in year two, it felt like there were like 20 growth and tracks, not because it was prioritized, but it was just like it was the thing that was sort of the default category, right? So like
Hmm.
if you're sort of like, well, we should do two panels on housing and we don't have a housing category, well, it doesn't quite fit in civics and media, so it ends up being growth and economy. So like that's kind of what happened.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
that's so interesting. We were also trying to play the like figure that out with our health track too. So we called it like all in for health because it's
Oh,
like,
cool.
you want to like try to capture that it's not only like healthcare workers and hospital systems and things like that that you're kind of including in the
That's
conversation,
right.
but yeah, the whole community is a part of of a community's health. So I love that's a really nice way to put it.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, our sort of biggest success story to date around that came from that look. So year one, we
Mm,
did a session on nonprofit grocery stores, right? And we brought in speakers from just
cool. Yeah.
coincidentally from Oklahoma. They both were. So one was in Tulsa, the other one was in Oklahoma City, I think. And they
Hmm.
presented their nonprofit grocery store model. And then the next year, so we did a session this year that was about how so United Way that inspires United Way and a bunch of other partners to actually develop one in Lafayette. So we were able to kind of come back and be like,
Amazing.
hey, look, we did a nonprofit grocery store and it kind of came from big towns, right? And that purely came from treating food insecurity as a health issue and not just a community development issue and thinking about it through that lens, because that was on the health track. That was a health track.
That is so cool. And we've had a couple scenarios like that, similar to that, except like one of the ones I'm thinking of. So it's definitely been that we've seen ideas that were discussed in the summit like happening in other places too.
Yeah,
But one of the ones that happened here is we did a session on social practice art. And ever since then, I think every year since that session, we've had a social practice artist in residency in our region, and it's been
cool.
super cool.
Yeah.
But a lot of times, like the benefit of the model that we both use is like there's so much reciprocity because if we have something that we really want to work on in our region, like we were just talking about septic systems and stuff and sewer systems and stuff like that. Like if there's like
Yeah,
something that
sure.
we really need to work on in our region, why not
Yeah.
use that platform to bring some experts, bring some people that have been
Mhm.
dealing with the same sorts of things and learn from it. And then reciprocally, when we're doing something really well that we can share, we have that platform to kind of share out. So it becomes this like symbiotic relationship, which is super cool.
Mhm.
Nonprofit grocery stores, though, we might have to steal that one. Yeah.
Take it, so
Yeah.
somebody used the term we're doing R&D, which is rip off and duplicate.
Yes, exactly. And
Yeah.
we're very
So
much of the mindset, like
yeah,
clearly, that's just like, do it, take it. Like the
yeah,
more the merrier, like mutual flourishing. If you flourish, we flourish. And
thousand
we
percent.
do that too with our local programs, like through the Hannah Grimes Center for Entrepreneurship. We take little by little, we've been taking the programs we've been cultivating for a long time and packaging them in guides. And then we share the guides freely. And it's like, change it, use it, rip it off, do whatever you want to do with it. You don't have to quote us. You don't have to like, brand it any particular way. And it's just great because I think it's like, why start over? Why recreate the wheel when there's these very cool models that are already out there? So like
100%.
we've talked a little bit about the programming, which is one kind of aspect of the modeling after radically rural. But then there's
Mhm.
like the physical space and the experience of people who come. So if folks have been to radically rural, they know that we use our whole downtown as a conference center, and you're sort of moving around from space to space, and it's very like fun and friendly and just generally like a pretty I don't know, like inspiring experience. So how would you say that that has been replicated in your case too?
Um, Yes and no. So the yes part is we are in Lafayette's downtown. So we host
Mhm.
it at a place called the Acadiana Center for the Arts. It's actually where the Currents office is, which is a pretty large contemporary art center here in town that has several venues within it. So like the kind of multi-stage experience that you get in Keene is duplicated here to an extent. But it really ends up being like we have a plenary theater. We have like a smaller zone where people can go. We can do like maybe 40 or 50. And then actually the room I'm sitting in here now, we did this for the first time this year. We do table talks. So you have three basic zones, right, that you go through. Um, we haven't built the programming out enough where I think we've would sprawl it around downtown, although that was kind of the original vision. Interestingly, just kind of a side note, we had a conversation in the debrief this year that was really about, well, how big should this actually get? And a lot of people, I was surprised a little to see how much they value the intimacy. And just to put it in
Mhm.
scale, I mean, we had about 250 people this year, and that was
Yeah.
about the number we had last year, which is a solid number. And my sense is people just like things to grow, right? And not that
Mhm.
I'm trying to take over the world or anything, but I was a little surprised at how guarded they were about, look, actually,
Mm.
I don't think I want this to get that much bigger. I mean, it's
Mm.
not like they didn't want it to grow at all, but, they were sort of like, I'm not sure that I want it to spread around
That's
downtown. I,
super
I like
interesting.
that I can just, I saw so-and-so, the mayor of Chattanooga speak, and I can go speak to him afterward. And I want
Yeah.
to retain that intimacy. The other
Yeah.
factor, though, and this is the thing that like we're hoping sort of over time becomes a bigger anchoring point for it. So we timed Big Towns with this festival that Lafayette puts on called Festival International, which is actually the
Oh, okay.
largest free world music festival in North America, right?
Whoa.
It attracts like 400,000 or 500,000 people to Lafayette, usually by the end of the week. So we time it to where like Big Towns happens Wednesday and Thursday. The festival itself gets started really in earnest by about Thursday or Friday. So some of this was like a cost saving measure, right? Where you're sort of like, all right, because I loved the year that I went to Radical Rural, and I assume they'll still do it. We went to this like dairy farm and had like a party, basically,
Hmm.
and so rather than have to pay for a party, it's like, well, you can come to downtown Lafayette and there will be just like a party there, right? Like there'll be a Zydeco band that'll play and
Pre-made
like we'll
party
have
right there.
right there. And
Yeah.
so people get kind of like a little taste of it before it gets nuts because it does get nuts. I mean, by Friday, I mean, you have, quarter million, 300,000 people that are just rolling around Lafayette, which is not a big place. So we've really tried to hitch our wagon to festival because it's genuinely one of Lafayette's, I mean, maybe Lafayette's best cultural expression, right? Like this massive world music festival and one of the things that we do the best. And so we use it sort of as a tourism point, like, hey, you're going to come to big towns, maybe book an extra day, stick around for festival. You should enjoy that. So we did that
I love
intentionally,
that.
but it also sort of has I don't really look at it as a downside, but it does sort of box us in a little bit because you are competing with this
Hmm.
enormous thing. And like every day that we would add, we'd have to be thinking about, well, are there enough hotel rooms in Lafayette to do that? How far down the street can we actually get before people just literally running into barricades and like whether we can get to those buildings? So it's a blessing and a curse, I guess, in a way. But we've felt like it's generally worth the trouble of dealing with the festival because people come in and maybe the sweetest thing I saw. We brought in a delegation from Grand Rapids, Michigan, this year, and I ran in to the former mayor, somebody with one of the chambers of commerce, somebody who runs one of the major festivals. All four of them had just been at the festival, right? And they all had bedazzled their faces. Like I was like walking down the street, and they completely bedazzled their faces, and I was like, "You guys jumped right in," and they were like, "Yep, we sure did." And like, it was pretty great. It was really charming, and I was really happy that they got to experience like one of the things that Lafayette I think does better than most communities.
That, but I like we've sort of played around with trying to tack on to different events too. And it is a challenge because it's
Yeah.
like there's a benefit, but then also, especially for us with being like a small, like a rural region, it's like when we tried to tack on to like the Monadnock International Film Festival as an example, we realized like, oh, there's only so many volunteers in our region to go around. So if people are like,
Yeah.
it's like I'm the
Yeah.
one that she would call to help facilitate or like interview some of the film directors, and like, but I've just been doing Radically Rural and like you know what I mean? So it's like you kind of realize like what works and what doesn't. But in your case, I kind of love ending with a party. I've wanted to end Radically Rural with a big block party for like quite a while. And it's just like we don't have the capacity to pull it off right now. But there's something about like actually one of our sessions this year is about ritual and culture and carnival and how like that's such an essential part
Mhm.
of strong rural places. And I just kind of love that break from the norm and like just getting bedazzled and just like having a big party. I think it's wonderful. And then when you were talking about the place, how you like mostly stick to that one center, it sort of does make sense though, in that the whole reason that we did that, the idea was rural places that don't necessarily have the infrastructure to host big gatherings shouldn't be excluded from being able to
Mm.
do that. You can just use what you have. But because you are in a big town, right, or a little city, then it's you might have some of that infrastructure so it becomes less necessary to do that. Although the fact that you are using the festival and some other points downtown is very much in the spirit of like, what do we have, that asset based thinking, like what do we
Mm.
have that we can utilize? But it sounds so fun. And I also like one of the things that we've been trying lately is when we say like come make it a vacation, because we have a lot to offer around here, not what you're describing, but I've been like encouraging people to bring their families. It's like you already
Yeah.
have the hotel room paid for, like if you're speaking, like you might as well like bring your family, enjoy the time, bring your kids to the sessions if you want to. Some people are like, this is my time away, I'm not doing that. And some people are like, oh, that actually makes it
Yeah.
really like
Sure.
doable.
Yeah.
And then I try to find ways to like engage the kids, like, hey, do you want to run the mic around or do you want to help hand out, name tags or different things like that? So I love that though. So like it's gaining track. Oh, and the growth. I did want to
Yeah.
comment on that too. So I think there's a difference between being like insular and being like, we're not letting anyone else in, and also just recognizing the value of like having a smaller group. And in even that smaller group, like will likely like rotate every year. It's not like you're not letting people in and out or something like that. But
Absolutely. Yeah.
we've sort of gotten to the point where we're like, we're really not looking to grow in numbers anymore. We are looking to grow in depth of relationship, of content, of really just like rooting out some of these like systemic difficult issues that rural communities deal with. That's sort of the ways that we're looking to grow. And of course, that doesn't mean we don't want new people to come because, you know, some people won't be able to come who came the year before and stuff like that. But we usually settle on around like 500 depending on the year.
Wow.
And that really is a nice number for us because again, you do want to be able to have those conversations in between. And then it doesn't always feel like 500 because some people might come one day and not the next or different things like that. But yeah, I'm
Yeah,
with you on the growth. Yeah.
and that's basically how it shakes out here, even with 250, right? Where like you get this, a lot of that right now at the stage we're in is local, and so people kind of roll in and out. I mean, the large theater in this building seats about 350, right? And
Hmm.
so, and we've started to have the discussion that's like, well, we could oversell this and frankly not run into that. Until now, that's sort of been our conceptual cap. Like, well,
Yeah.
we wouldn't want somebody who paid to be here to not be able to go to a thing, right?
Hmm.
But then we're realizing, well, so many people like we can oversell it to some extent because no one goes to every single thing. Is
Yeah.
kind of the way it ends up happening. It's been a lot of fun. I mean, you said the word fun, and I think that's been something we've been very intentional about, is trying to make the experience entertaining for people.
Hmm.
And something I took away from Radical Rural was like you guys did such an amazing job of programming just time, that
Mm.
wasn't in the classroom. And I really felt like, I mean, who doesn't go to a conference and feel like the best part is like the cocktail party where you meet somebody and you have that 20-minute conversation about something you didn't expect to learn about, and then that's the thing you take home with you. Of course,
Hmm.
the class time is important and it sets the frame for a lot of those
Exactly.
discussions. But so we've worked pretty hard to make sure that we pace it to where people can
Hmm.
experience, like I think we wanted. I think I remember y'all specifically saying you wanted people to leave rested, right? Which is like not a thing that people usually kind of go into conferences, right? And so we've tried it as best we can. Of course, this is in the context of this like massive music festival that goes on around. It's kind of hard to give people a break mentally from that. But we're also a bit of a gnat on on this horse. Like Big Towns is a very small thing compared to the festival, so it barely rates for them too.
I like that though. It's so true because like oftentimes it's in those like periods of rest or periods of like unstructured time. Like you're in the
Yeah,
shower and all of a sudden you're like, what? I
yeah,
thought of it, or like not that anyway, it has very little to do with radically rural, but if you if you're like, walking around downtown, you pop in the coffee shop, you're chatting with someone, and then it's
yeah.
like you have that unexpected sort of thing, like that really is why we do that. And so we sort of think of like the sessions and the experience and everything as like creating conditions, but
Hmm.
like what happens from that is really dependent on the ingredients, like the people that come. And so yeah, so like one more question for you, which is just like,
Yeah.
well, maybe two. One is like, what are you most looking forward to with big towns?
Hmm.
And the second one is if there's other places in the country and like people listening in who want to replicate the model too and try something, like what would your advice to them be?
Sure. So the first question, I mean, we just finished. I'm going to answer it with kind of an anecdote. So um, we this year had Dean Baque, who's former editor of the New York Times, interview the mayor of Chattanooga, and so we recorded it. And so I spent some time this week listening to edits of that interview that we'll publish as a podcast later. And the thing that really tickled me the most was hearing the audience questions and realizing that there were people from other places, right, that were there and that were resonating with that conversation and asking pointed or insightful questions, which is like the environment that we want to create. So that's the thing that gets me really excited about it. I think the idea that like as we've pitched it to our partners and sort of locally to people, of course they want to understand like what's in it for Lafayette, right? Like people, of course, love the idea of being helpful to other communities, but they really like, want this to be beneficial to the town that they live in. And um, I found myself just really um, enthusiastic about the idea that we can really build this conversation and that there will be pathways to bring other people to Lafayette for the benefit of the town that I live in, and of course, hopefully for their own towns too. Like I mean, you mentioned earlier how you've seen ideas that have been presented at Radically Rural seeded in other communities. And we haven't achieved that just yet, at least not to my knowledge. If anybody out there has been to big towns and done something, please let me know. But that's like the goal. Like like it's wonderful that we've done it for Lafayette, and I take an immense amount of pride in that. Because sometimes, people say with these kinds of events, well, that's just a bunch of talk. And you're like, well, you got to start somewhere, right? And talk is often the thing that you start with. And so
Yeah.
seeing that kind of action seeded in other parts of the country, I think would be really powerful because, of course, like the message of all of these things is our communities are unique, but only so much, right? Like just because your community is unique doesn't mean an idea that gets pollinated elsewhere can't work for you too.
Hmm.
So that's the piece that I'm most excited about, which is like, how do we grow the participation from outside of South Louisiana specifically, and then more broadly grow it participation. We've had people from across the country, but of course, that's the thing I want to grow year over year. To your second question, right? Like, what would be my advice to somebody who wants to do something similar? I mean, I've thought about this a little bit because I've actually been asked to present on this idea to journalism conferences now, right? Because we've used this as a revenue model for our newsroom,
Hmm.
as a trust builder in our community, and so people are like, "Well, how do I do that sort of thing in my town?" Right? As a journalist, and like, it's kind of hard to be like, "Well, you have to just find a big town's idea yourself, like go to Radically Rural and figure it out." I guess would be my answer, but um, I have to believe that there's a version of this wherever you are. And in fact, year one, that I invited the publisher of a publication in Savannah, Georgia, coincidentally also called The Current. And in fact, I invited them because they're called The Current. And I was like, I used to get your mail. You should come to Lafayette. And so I brought her, and we were talking about it a little bit afterward. I don't know if she ever took action on it, but I pointed out to her, I was like, look, you could do this. You're in Savannah, right? You could have a whole conference that's just not Atlanta. So this is a conference for towns in Georgia that aren't Atlanta, right? Like there is a version of this experience, this like identifying what your geographic experience is. I think I would assume in every town. And maybe it's not a national experience, right? Like being a mid-sized city or a rural community. Maybe it's something specific to your state or to your region. But I think the reality is that we all sort of exist in that sort of interdimensional,
Hmm.
interdependent uh, space. And so, like, I think if you take a step back and have an honest conversation about the profile of community, you could probably find a thing that looks a lot like Radical.
Yeah.
Maybe it won't be multidisciplinary in that way, but it probably
Hmm.
will be multidimensional in a way that's effective and that will resonate with people. And I think that's fundamentally what it is. I was really delighted that when I started pitching the idea of big towns to people, and I said, look, there's something specific about being a mid-sized community that people just seem to click with that. It didn't take a
Hmm.
lot of convincing. And I think you just kind of have to find that kernel of resonant experience for people and they'll respond to it.
That's so cool. Well, one day I'm going to make it there,
I
and
hope
I'm
so.
definitely going to go to that festival afterward, and I will be fully bedazzled.
Right. It's
Um,
worth it just for the festival, I have to say.
I know,
Yeah.
right? But
Yeah.
it was so great to talk with you. And I'm so glad this has worked well for you. And,
Yeah.
sometimes I get overwhelmed thinking about like all the conferences and all the events out there and all the time that goes into them. And I'm like, what are we doing? Are we actually? But it actually does matter. Like
Mhm.
it matters because of the conversations you have. It matters because of the connections. It's like that thing you have to move through, just like, yeah, it's not like we can eat once and then be like, I never need to eat again because I already ate. Like it's like we have to, these are the moments and the experiences that continue to like fertilize the soil, and we have to keep doing that. We can't just like neglect it, and it
Yeah.
does really add up, and it does really matter in so many ways, even if you can't always follow the threads and see what has come of it. And a lot of those, like I've come around years later and found out like, oh, so and so got her PhD in rural studies after attending Radically Rural. I had no idea that was happening, or like,
Yeah.
like a lot of times you don't find out till later too, sort of what happened. And even if you never do, it's okay because
Yeah.
it's about the relational approach. And well, it was awesome talking to you. Thank you for all your great work. And yeah, that's it.
Thank you. It's my and really we owe bring all of Keene if you can. If I could somehow finance that, I would. I feel like I really do owe a debt of gratitude to the people of Keene and Radically Rural, and of course to you and to Terry who invited me originally. And I honestly cannot thank you guys enough for that. And I hope that I can keep doing that. So figure out a way to get here. I will do my best to make sure it can happen.
Oh, awesome. Thank you so much for
Yeah.
saying that. All right, we'll
Yeah.
talk soon.
Okay. Bye bye.